to get started on time. And today we're going to be talking about men, masculinity, and modern love. We've got with us Prachi Gangwani, who's the author of this brand new book. Very, very interesting. It's taken her, I think, 3 years, talked to lots of people, and we'll get right into it. But before we get into it, I want to hear from you guys. What kind of drove you to say, yeah, you know what, this is a talk I want to hear in, I want to listen to, I want to get more information on. This is going to be brutally honest. It raises a question that we are sometimes maybe afraid to ask ourselves. In her book, Dear Men, Prachi delves into how men across ages navigate romantic relationship in a country that's still teetering on the cusp of modern and traditional. And this is something that even men, women, all of us are delving into. It's that, we don't know which side, we still have the traditional values, yet we are looking at the West and kind of saying, where is our place? So in this book, she talks to men and how they deal with online dating, the traditional gender roles, the effect on mental health, romance and marriage, the big question, why they hurt women, or do we think that they hurt us, toxic masculinity and consent. Prachi is a Delhi-based writer and content creator. She talks about relationships, sexuality, gender, culture, and wellness. She runs a digital publication by the name of Keeping Zen and is also the content head at Human Edge Enterprises. So Prachi, a very, very warm welcome. We're excited to have you here and really excited to delve into this topic.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here as well. And I am also equally excited to talk to everyone here about toxic masculinity and masculinity in general, I suppose, and relationships and what it means for all of us. So yeah, let's begin.
So, first of all, I want to ask you this question, and I'm sure first I want to hear also from the audience what drew them to this topic and what drew you to this subject.
Sure. So shall I go first? Or
yes, please. I see a very quiet crowd today, guys. I want to hear from all of you also.
We'll warm up.
Yes, we'll warm up.
Yeah, I have a ton of questions for everyone here, so we'll get to that. Well, I started working on this book really very innocently. It was not a book idea at first. It all happened when I was working at iDiva, which is a women's lifestyle magazine. I was handling the relationships and sex section for them, and I would talk to women a lot.
You were like the dear ex.
The agony aunt. Yeah, well, yeah, in our bay, I was the agony aunt, yes.
You're too young to be the agony aunt, but still.
Yeah, so I would talk to my colleagues. It started with my colleagues, of course. So I would keep asking women about their experiences in dating and relationships, etc. And then it evolved from having these conversations with my colleagues to my friends from college and then their friends, and like all sorts of women that I would come across. And I realized that there are certain patterns, like certain common experiences that we have as women, as heterosexual women, with the men in our lives. So this book, I just want to put it out there, is about heterosexual relationships. I haven't delved into other sexualities and other, same-sex relationships or the LGBT, queer community. This is purely about heterosexual relationships. So it started with that. I realized that there are certain patterns, commonalities that women have in the kind of experiences that they have with men. And so I got really curious. I made a WhatsApp group of like around 12, 13 guys on my phone whose numbers I had saved. Some of these were friends, some of these were acquaintances, a couple of colleagues. And I started asking them questions about what their thoughts were on certain aspects of relationships or dating. So stuff like, who do they think should pick up the tab on a date? Do they think that agreeing to go on a date with you is consent to sex? So just stuff like that I started asking. That's where the conversations began. And I also started asking these questions online, like on my Instagram, for example. I would just put it on my stories, and a lot of people started responding, both men and women. But the more I listened into these responses, I realized that even with men, there are certain patterns, and we haven't explored this. Like I couldn't find any literature around it. I couldn't find any conversation going on at that time. This is 2017, right? Around what men are experiencing in relationships and dating. So my initial idea for the book was that I will write a dating guide for men, you know.
I'm sure that's book number 2.
That could be an
I think
epic.
everybody
I
is
don't think
waiting for that. I
anybody
see
would read that book.
Yes.
I don't think anybody would read that book. So that's when I realized I set out to write a few articles, and then step 2 was, okay, dating guide for heterosexual men. And then I realized that it would just not serve the purpose, you know, because there are certain things that men are also very confused about that no one is talking to them about. And those are the nuances that need to come out, really, if we want to have a constructive conversation about heterosexual relationships. So that's how the book came about.
And how did you go about your research? Was it structured? Was it unstructured? Was it just a series of conversations?
Sure. So it was, it started off unstructured, of course. It started off with these very casual conversations. But then when I realized it needs more exploration, I made a structure around it. I wrote down what are the areas that I want to explore, and I started asking questions around those areas. Simultaneously, I also started doing a lot of reading. And what I realized during that time was that in India, we don't have any sort of research around this. Around masculinity in general, we have very little research in India. You know, forget masculinity in the context of relationships, that I think we have a really long way to go. But even when it comes to just mental health in men, for example, you know, what does it mean to be an Indian man? Like, there's very little research around it, right? What is it like to be a male teenager in India? We don't know, right? So that's what I realized when I started looking for research around this or studies around this. So sadly, a lot of my academic research that went into the book was, you know, based on studies that are being done in the Western world. Of course, like, they are then, you know, analyzed or interpreted rather within the Indian context as much as I could. So that was the second part of my research. And the third part of my research was talking to experts. So I spoke to therapists who are working with the male population. I spoke to a lawyer also to give me insight on, you know, what the laws around consent and relationships look like. So that was the third leg of my research. And then I also, so a lot of the book is also based on ongoing / current events in the country. So for example, mental health among men became a huge conversation when, you know, Sushant Singh Rajput passed away, and our like collective denial of mental health issues among men, right? So that is also a part of the book. So a lot of that's then the fourth part of the research is around the current ongoing events in the country.
So what was, when you did all of this research, spoke to so many people, what was the most shocking thing you learned?
You know, I can't.
Shocking.
Well, I cannot, unfortunately, I cannot pick one. I think there were a lot of things that were quite shocking. The most surprising thing, not shocking, but surprising thing was how willing a lot of the men were to talk about certain issues in a very vulnerable way. I think that is something I was not expecting when I started working on the book. I was, you know, expecting to be woke fished, if you know what that means, you know, to be given these politically correct answers and all of that. And that also happened. But I was quite surprised by the candor, the openness of a lot of men that I spoke to. But as far as my learnings go, I think there were a lot of shocking revelations.
And we'll get into all of them as we move forward. But I want to ask you this question before I hand it over to you. So, you know, anytime a woman writes on anything that is to do with men or strong women, you get labeled as a feminist. So are you now being labeled as a feminist?
Well, I don't know about that. I think I've always been a feminist. But my fear with this book is that I'll be labeled as a men's rights activist, which is not the case. This is well, I suppose it's a feminist book, but it's neither pro men nor anti women, neither anti women or pro women, anti men. It doesn't take a side. I'm just trying to um, show what's happening, with men and how they are navigating relationships.
So let's get started, Prachi. Over to you. I know we have lots to talk about. And guys, like I said, the conversation is with you. So please keep chiming in. We want to hear your thoughts, whether you agree, disagree, whether you think, yes, this was, something that you're seeing also. So Prachi, take it over.
Thank you, Sukriti. So I do have, I would love for all of you guys to be to interact and to share your thoughts. So I have a bunch of questions around the 4-5 things that I plan to talk about today. And we'll start with toxic masculinity, because I think that's really at the heart of the whole dialogue around gender and relationships that's happening currently. And it's also kind of a guiding force when it comes to understanding relationships. So before I talk about what it really is, I'd love to hear from some of you what you think toxic masculinity is. So if anybody would like to chime in.
Domination, says Muddit. I said over aggressiveness. Smita says Kabir Singh. Maria says male hegemony. I can't even pronounce it. Julian says abuse.
Yeah.
And Abhita says stubborn. Deepika says patriarchal mindset. Sangeeta says stonewalling when they want to. Shilpa says ego. Oh, sorry, this is going. Politicians. Amita says ego. Sandeep says frustrations manifesting in physical aggression. Ritu says dominance. Julian says manipulation. Tarika showing lack of vulnerability. Dipti says control. I think it's all of those.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's actually all of those and none of those. So this is what I realized while working on the book, is that, the term toxic masculinity is an abused term. We overuse it, and very often we use it incorrectly. And I have been guilty of it as well. So what I'm going to take you guys through now is, let's talk about masculinity first, right? Because we cannot understand toxic masculinity unless we talk about masculinity. So what is masculinity? It is a social construct, right? Being born male doesn't make you masculine, or being born female doesn't automatically mean that you're feminine, right? Femininity and masculinity are things that we learn, things that we are taught. They are behaviors, they are expectations that others have, and we learn to have of our own selves, that we internalize because of the social construct that we are in. So in my book, I don't know how many of you have ordered the book or have read it, but I will just show you. There's a little table I've made over here, which is on page 39, which basically lists down, traits that we associate with masculinity and femininity. So I'll throw this second question at you guys. What do you think are the traits, personality traits, that come to mind that you think are masculine? So a little different from my previous question, in the sense that these are not behaviors now that we're talking about. These are more like just the emotional, psychological makeup of the person that comes to mind. Strong, yeah.
Bread earning, financial, dominant.
Right. Yeah.
Provider, physical strength, protective, boys don't cry, aggressive. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So these are all great. And really, toxic masculinity kind of just floats around all these things that you guys are listing down. So these are very helpful. But I'll tell you what I have here. So masculinity is generally competitiveness, commanding, all wonderful. Yes. So masculinity, when we think of masculine, we think of strong. Someone said it here. We think of ruthless, rational, we think of aggressive, we think fearless, we think outgoing, we think focused, we think hardworking, we think perseverant, impatient, unemotional, right? So that's a whole mix of different traits. So my third question to you is, are all these traits toxic? Is it toxic to be focused? Is it toxic to be hardworking? Is it toxic to be perseverant? So that's the difference. Yeah. So that is the difference between masculinity and toxic masculinity. And I think this is a mistake that we make, and this is kind of the danger of this movement of talking about masculinity and talking about toxic masculinity, is that we think that all male behavior is terrible and we must change men. No, that's not the case. A lot of feminine behaviors and traits and traits and behaviors are also toxic, but we won't go into that. So coming back to toxic masculinity, I think it's very important to understand that being masculine is not toxic. There are certain aspects of being masculine that are toxic and that hurt everyone. They hurt women, they hurt children, and they hurt men as well. So that's my 2 cents on toxic masculinity. Now let's talk about where does it come from. So I want to ask you a very simple question, and maybe like take a second to think about the answer, to reflect a little bit. What do you do when you see a grown man or even a young boy cry or feel sad or show like any kind of just sad and fear or sadness? What do you feel when that happens, and what do you do?
We try to comfort them, but it makes us uncomfortable.
Makes you uncomfortable.
Feels that he is okay is like me, Sangeeta says.
That's wonderful. Advise them.
Amrita says advise them. Dipti says normal. Tanya says for me, I would comfort him. Nairuta says it's okay to feel this way. Smita says sensitive.
Okay. Well, you all are a very woke bunch, I have to say. But I think maybe it's okay to be emotional. Absolutely. Okay. So someone says it causes dissonance, and that's Mudit who said it causes dissonance. Okay, great. So most of you seem to think that it's absolutely normal and it's okay, and you would comfort them. But Sukriti pointed out that you would probably feel a little uncomfortable watching a man or a young boy showing emotion. And I think that, of course, we are always evolving, and a lot of the very rigid gender roles have changed / are changing, but we still have this very deeply ingrained discomfort around men being emotional, being vulnerable, and showing emotion or expressing themselves in a vulnerable way. And I think that is a very huge part of where toxic masculinity comes from. It's very easy to kind of blame men and say that it's all them and all their behavior, and they have the onus to change. But I think that we as a society and as a culture do kind of enable it in some ways. So I'll give you guys a very interesting example. Well, this is not an example. It's a research study that I came across while working on the book, which says that male toddlers, young boys, are a lot more emotionally expressive than female toddlers. I'm not a parent, so I don't have firsthand experience about this, but I'd love to know from those of you who are parents, maybe if it doesn't matter what gender your child is, but I'd love to know if you see this, if you've experienced this, where young boys show more emotion, perhaps are more needy, not needy, but like more open to comfort from others or soothing from others than girls. Okay, Rufus says not, absolutely not. They are the same. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so I'll continue then. I think they're the same. Okay. Okay. Well, that's good to know, but that's not what my research said. So, young toddlers, according to this research, male toddlers are more emotionally expressive than female toddlers. But by the time they reach adolescence, it kind of switches. It switches, and adolescent boys become less expressive than adolescent girls. And a lot of that has to do with the way we treat or the way we respond to young boys showing emotion versus young girls showing emotion. Young girls are kind of socialized a little bit more. They are exposed to, more like varied emotional social situations and interactions, which then reinforces or nurtures their nurturing side, if that makes sense. Someone said here that boys become reserved when they grow up. There is a difference the moment they turn 7 to 8 or thereabout. My brother was very expressive as a child versus a teenager. Yeah. So that's the thing. So why is that? Do we ever like pause and question that? Why is it that, they're, regardless of whether there's a palpable difference when they are toddlers or not, I think all children, all infants are very dependent on adults, so sure. But like, why is it that we see this difference after a certain age when gender becomes an important part of a child's identity? We start seeing these differences. So, now with like this whole gender fluid movement coming across, some of those differences are becoming less and less rigid and less like in your face. And that again reinforces the fact that we raise boys to be masculine and we raise girls to be feminine. So,
And they're saying, yeah, we keep telling our boys not to cry. They become conscious of their emotions, not to open. I think during puberty, there is no guiding figure that explains the changes, because also not only how we're raising them, but also according to Smitha, the stereotypes that are all around them.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an important point and another kind of thing to be wary of. It's very easy to blame family and parenting, but kids are exposed to so many different things, the stuff that you watch on TV, right? Even a lot of these storybooks for children, right? They have these sexist undertones. A lot of the cartoons for children, they have these sexist undertones. All of pop culture is very genderized, right? And then kids go to school, and what are the kind of interactions that they're having with, with teachers and with their classmates? So I think, thank you, Smitha, for bringing that up. I think that's a very important thing to be cognizant of, is that it's not all on the parents, right? There are a lot of forces that we are fighting against when it comes to undoing gender stereotyping. And so, yeah, that's a great point to remember and to think about. But I think as parents and as families, what we can probably do is we can have these conversations at home and keep having these conversations at home, so that we can at least like undo some of the exposure to stereotypes that children get in the outside world. So, but yeah, absolutely, I think there's a lot that happens that feeds into this. Okay, so now moving to the next thing. Yeah, so Ritu says there have been young boys who forcefully hold back their emotions just because they've been teased by their peers for the same. Okay, I'm going to segue a little bit and talk about something that is related to Ritu's comment here. It's not just young boys, but even among adult men, there is a lot of gatekeeping that happens by other men. And this is something that came through in my interviews, where a few men spoke about this, is that even if they try to be or want to be, you know, a little bit sensitive in some ways, or talk about their feelings, or if they want to make unconventionally or like unconventional career choices, even something like that, they are often kind of shamed by other men. Like one of the men I interviewed, for example, uh, switched to a creative field from engineering. Okay, so he had studied engineering, and at around like in his mid-20s, he decided that he wants to switch gears and work in a creative field. And he told me that it wasn't the women in my life, it wasn't my colleagues, but it was the other men in my life who kind of said that this is a bad decision, or this is like stupid, or like kind of like mocked my decision. So this gatekeeping, it's not just peers for young children, or like for adolescents, or younger age group, but it's also all the way in your adulthood. Adult men do this kind of gatekeeping when it comes to staying within very rigid, like a man box, that is what it's called, or very rigid definition of masculinity. Okay, so moving to the next thing that I wanted to talk about is, how does this whole thing, whether it's rigid gender roles or toxic masculinity in particular, what do you guys think it does to relationships, to heterosexual romantic relationships?
I think there's an expectation of traditional roles.
And what would that mean, traditional roles?
Because if they see, traditional roles where the woman is doing X and the man is doing X, that is what they think is normal, and that is what they expect.
Can you give an example of?
If they see, typically in most houses, the woman is doing all the housework, the guy is going out earning. This is in their mind, what is the role of a man, and this is what the role of a woman is. If they see that the woman is the one that is picking up the emotional whatever, and she's the one that caters to that, that is her role. If she's the one that's constantly taking care of the in-laws, that is her role. So these things are just also based on what we are seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. It so it's kind of like, this is a really nice reference, which I don't remember if I mentioned in the book or not, but it came up in one of the conversations I had while I was working on the book, is that someone said that, like within this very stereotypical gendered kind of a structure, marriage is like running a business. It's like you have this business that you have to run, and there's a CEO and there's a CFO, and that is what is happening, right? And like, I don't want that. So yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on when it comes to what rigid gender roles do to relationships, and in particularly to marriage. And let's see what some of the audience are saying.
So Sangeeta says they have preconceived notions of what a woman should be based on childhood experiences with women around them. Mudit says it leads to domination by the male over the female. Deepika says it affects their career choices of the wife, child, and rearing responsibilities. Julian says relationships will burn down at some point. Ritu says it makes communication highly ineffective, and mind reading happens more often. And Amita says why it is always the man. Dipti says expectation mismatch.
Mm-hmm. I think all of these are like, absolutely relatable. Okay, I just got distracted by the last comment about the mom baking cakes. So yeah, all of these are absolutely relatable. And I think the biggest thing that happens is that communication becomes very calculated, within these very set roles. I wonder how authentic is the communication. And this was something that came up at pretty much every stage of relationships that I explored while working on the book, whether that's, casual dating or online dating, right? Communication is very like, it doesn't flow that easily in heterosexual relationships, right? And that has that comes part of it comes from the fact that as a culture, we are not very good at communicating. You know, for those of us who are adults now, who are in our 30s and older now, for many people in this age group, you know, we've had the kind of parenting where if you ask a question as a child, you're told, "Aise hi hota hai," or like, "You do this because I said so," right? You're not allowed to ask why. You're not like, or you're not encouraged to ask why. You're not explained why things are the way they are. They just are. So you do it. So as adults, we've learned to just do the same. You know, this is just how it is. So we do it. So we don't question a lot of things. We haven't learned very effective ways of communicating. And that comes through in relationships, and that comes through in every stage of the relationship. And when you top that up with these very structured gender roles, then you kind of stay stuck within that, right? And I think everything that you guys are sharing is all very profound, and I really appreciate it. But it's also very uh, kind of one-off things that become either a man's responsibility or a woman's responsibility, right? So, for example, why is it that a man proposes? Now it's changing, but even now
Not
it's
changing much.
exactly, that's exactly what I was going to say. Even now, there is a lot of resistance to the woman taking charge in a relationship in the course of, you know, how the relationship will evolve. And this resistance is on both sides. It's not just men who don't want to let go of the reins, it's also the women who expect the man to propose, right? It's so deeply ingrained in us. You know, we as women will sit and wait and wait and wait and then be frustrated. Ki, why is he not asked, popping the question? Like, why does he, you know? And on the other hand, if we are not ready as women to take the plunge, then we don't feel that we have the authority to say that, right? So even something like that, like deciding how the relationship will evolve, at what pace, and when, you know, even that role is very split and very genderized. So it's at all levels. It's at all levels. Um, Financially, I think a lot of for actually, you know, to be honest, I cannot think of a single man I interviewed who did not feel this way, where even though they would like to be with a partner who is financially independent and contributes to the relationship or the life that they want to build together, they themselves want to be the breadwinner, you know? So even financially, when you talk about it, this is what we are trained, right? That the man is the breadwinner, the man is the one who has the responsibility of the finances, etc. And while like women have been fighting for economic independence, etc., etc., and we have come very far, and in a lot of relationships, women are doing better than their male partners are. The men still hold on to the idea that their worth as a partner comes from how much money they make and how well they can provide. So even something like that. So it's across the board, it's at so many different levels that this genderization impacts relationships as well as us as men and women and as individuals. So um, you know, we're not just like talking about it just for the fun of it, just because it's like an interesting topic to talk about, but it really does affect our lives.
And Smita has brought up also an interesting point. We ladies have a choice to give up our careers and not work if we wish to. Men can't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the other way that, you know, this is the social structure we live in, right? The paternity leave in India, I think it's like 15 days or something like that. And that is also not across the board. So I believe, if I remember this correctly, only government jobs allow you 1 week in some organizations, Tarika. Yeah, that's because for the private sector, paternity leaves are not mandated. So it's up to them if they want to give a paternity leave or not. And if they do, then how much or how little is up to them. So that's also the structure, right? Um, so there's paternity leave, and there's no concept like women can take a break and then come back to work, right? And now there are avenues for that. For men, it's just not an option, right? So that's how it is. And even within families, I feel like now that we're talking about fatherhood and paternity leaves, etc., I'll bring this up, is that even within families, we, kind of keep the fathers at bay. Like, how much does an average Indian family involve a father in parenting? I don't know. That's something to kind of pause and think about.
I think something interesting has also come up, and I think this is one of the issues. Somebody has said, I had a bestie whose husband penalized her as she did not contribute financially in the relationship. So she was shocked, and they are on the verge of getting a divorce. So I think this expectation is there, even in women's mind, that working is our desire. We do not need to give 50% or 30% because we are going to produce children. So I think this is also having some kind of a havoc, because if the guy says, listen, I want to have everything 50-50, we're shocked. If we want to pay the bill, it's great. If the guy says, please pay 50%, it's like, oh my God, what just happened? So is there some kind of thinking in our minds that's also there that, we want to make that decision? We don't want anybody else to put that decision on us. So is that also affecting the psyche of men? Because they don't know where to go, because we will say, okay, I want to contribute, but don't ask me to contribute.
Yeah. I think absolutely right, because women have the choice, but men don't. At least at a social level, as things stand now, we have the choice, like you rightly said, to work or not work, to contribute or not contribute, right? And now more and more men are saying, no, you have to contribute financially. And this is absolutely true. It's happening, right? We are shocked as women. We're like, oh my God, this is too much pressure, you can't do. But imagine, like, men have been living with this pressure for generations, right? So I think it's all in a flux, and I do think that we're all headed in the same direction. We're all headed in the direction where both men and women want equal responsibility. Like, we as women, for example, want our partners to be more involved emotionally. We want our partners to be more involved as fathers, right? We are also putting those kind of pressures, which were earlier only on us as women, on the men in our lives, and simultaneously the men are putting the kind of pressures that they have had as men in their lives on the women in their lives, right? So we're all kind of headed in the same direction, but obviously, whenever there's this change, there's a transition, or there's challenge to an already existing system, there's going to be some resistance to it, and there's going to be some discomfort around it, and there's going to be a lot of confusion around it, like, we don't know how to respond to this. But I think everybody wants a choice. Nobody wants to be put into a box. Nobody wants to have these compulsions based on something that we can't control. You cannot control what sex you are born into. You cannot control the fact that you have had, say, 20, 30 years of very genderized upbringing or socialization. You also cannot control the fact that you live in a very genderized society, right? So nobody wants impositions. We all want the freedom to choose. But I think that we all, both men and women, as well as other genders, we all want very similar things, but we're getting there differently because we have very different histories.
Interesting. Very. Tanya says, I have cases where men don't provide for their family. Money is always the issue. This bestie of mine draws up an Excel sheet by the month, and to get it ratified by the husband to get some money into the household kitty. This is another type of control. Mansi says, I'd like to share something here. My parents were both working, but though my father gave my mother the opportunity to go ahead with a career, and he took a backseat and worked from home and took care of me when I was a kid. And in turn, my mother assisted him in his entrepreneurial aspects. Very nice. Women can't open up about sex even, and arguments arise. I really like something that was in your book. Now that we've turned to the topic of sex, and we will get into the topic of sex, that sex is done when the man is done.
Yeah.
About sex, it is not that there is ever a question that when is sex done, it is always assumed if the man is done that, I really like that because you also brought it up. What about that? What about the sexual expectations? And is that also changing?
Hmm. I do think it is changing. I think this was, you asked me earlier what was the most shocking thing I learned while working on the book. I think this is somewhere on top of the list. Because, of course, we've been talking about sex and we have been talking about sexuality, but how much have we been talking about male sexuality? Not so much here in India, right? We've been talking about female sexuality and female pleasure and all of that. Yes, those conversations are happening, but we haven't really talked about male sexuality as much. So when I was doing my interviews, someone said something to me which has really stayed with me. This gentleman in his 30s, he said, this whole discourse around sexuality, whether that's in pop culture or, on the internet or whatever, it makes you feel like men are always having good sex. But we're not. We also have bad sex and we also have headaches, So there is almost like no room to talk about the fact that that men are not actually driven by sex, that they are not actually thinking about sex all the time. They're thinking about other things as well. And that, their stress levels, their body image issue, they also have body image issues, one, but like how confident they feel in their bodies, their stress level, the work pressure that they have, the emotional connection that they feel with their partner, all of these things make a difference to men as much as they do to women. I think because as a society we have normalized casual sex for men and we have stigmatized casual sex for women, or sex in general, we have normalized it for men and stigmatized it for women. That's why men perhaps find it easier to have sex than women do, right? But they still need the same things that we do to feel confident in their body, to feel sexy and attractive, to not be stressed out, whether that's by work or family pressure or whatever, and to feel an emotional connection. So I think this was something that I never thought about before I started working on the book and before I started interviewing men. I also assumed that men will just, get on whenever, like they don't need any, they don't have any prerequisites like women do,
That was very, very, very interesting, actually, also in the book, because I think the other part that I thought was also very interesting, I'd love to have your take on it, is the question of family and family acceptance of the relationship, because that was also something that did come up, because men are still seeking that acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so are women, actually.
Yeah. But okay, so I haven't really explored this in depth as much. It did come up. I did realize that for men, it's very important that they have family approval when it comes to choosing their life partner. Um, for women, I think it's slightly different because, again, this very patriarchal setup where the woman leaves, right? So it doesn't matter as much. You don't have to, the son-in-law doesn't have to spend his daily life with the woman's parents, right? But the daughter-in-law has to do that. And I think it partly stems from that. And also this whole like Raja Beta son preference. I mean, there are just so many different layers to it where for men, marriage is more of a family affair, it seems to me, than it is for women now in this present day and age. I think women have more leeway to rebel and when they want to make their own individual choices when it comes to choosing a life partner, because and it's both for good reason and bad, right? The good reason is that because we have been fighting for our independence and we have been raising our voices against systems like this for so long that we have actually come this far, right? But the bad reason is that for a lot of families and a lot of people, when the woman is married off, she's not your problem anymore. She'll go and deal with it, right? So it's somewhere in the middle. But for men, I think the challenge when it comes to marriage and family approval, etc., is that it's all like one unit in an average man's mind, and he has to then make sure that there's harmony between everyone, right? So there is a kind of a certain sense of responsibility, I suppose, that comes from it. And then the other thing too is that family is also, especially in our country, it's a very patriarchal structure, right? So it serves the men. It is about, I don't want to use the word ownership, but unfortunately, I cannot think of another word at the moment. But the way marriage came about and the way marriage currently is in society is about a little bit about that, right? There's still ripple effects of that we still see. So I think it comes from that. But yeah, absolutely. For men, it seems to be a very important criteria that they have full family approval when it comes to their life partner. For most men, not all.
Two more things before we open it out for questions. One is the question of mental health in men, because this is really taking a big toll on them, which we don't think about. And then the concept of consent, has that changed also?
Let me address consent first, because it's easier. I think we've started talking about consent only after Me Too. We weren't talking about it before Me Too. So our conversations around consent, our discourse around consent is still very young, very nascent, very limited to certain groups and certain kinds of people. There is a lot of content around it on the internet, yes, but we wrongly assume that just because it's on the internet, everybody's seeing it, but they're not, right? So I think that it's a conversation that has started most definitely because of Me Too, and I think that's one of the biggest achievements of the movement as well, is that we have now started talking about consent. But do we understand it yet? I don't think so. I don't think we do. I think we have a long way to go. And that is, again, true for both men and women. I think women also, we also don't really have a very tight grip on consent. So there's a lot of learning there. And about mental health and men and mental health in general. So one of the things that toxic masculinity, or this very rigid gender stereotypical society or social structure, does to men is that it makes them less likely to seek help. It also makes it less likely for men to be diagnosed with mental health issues. And that's a really serious problem. That's a really serious problem. I was reading up on something a couple of days ago, and I came across this very shocking graph, which I will try to show you guys on the screen. I don't know how much of it you'll be able to see, but so just to put it out there, the suicide rate among men is the highest among all gender groups globally. Okay, this is all over the world. I knew this. I have known this for a while, and then couple of days ago, I came across this graph. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
The blue is men. And that is between 1971, I think, and 2019. And it really kind of stops you in your tracks, when you see this graph just going up, up, up. So I think men and mental health is a very serious issue. And it comes from the fact that we haven't taught men to be vulnerable. We haven't allowed men into the mental health space, both as professionals as well as clients. Men are less likely to be diagnosed with depression or anxiety, and more likely to commit suicide. So this is just one aspect of it, right? And there's so many other different aspects of it, which I think I could talk about it forever, really. But I will leave you with this very shocking graph, and I will urge you to read the book to understand more about mental health, because it's not only when it comes to depression and anxiety, it's also very everyday things that we gloss over, like temper issues. why do we accept temper issues and like just ignore temper issues among men? It's real distress, that anger comes from. We don't talk about that either. So those kind of things. Yeah.
Lots of very interesting stuff. Couple of questions that are coming up. So now that you've seen men, and when we talk about traditional and modernity, but we're still seeing, like Vanshika has said, men are still wanting dowry, all of these things that are very patriarchal mindset. How do we see that? Because most of the people that you interviewed were younger. Yeah. They were between 26 to like 30, 40 maybe maximum. How did you see that mindset change? And then please, whoever would like to ask questions, please do raise your hands and I will let you guys take the floor. So where are we on the spectrum now?
Yeah. I think we are all over. I really do think we are all over. So I don't know if I can give you a very holistic picture of this. I interviewed, like you said, I interviewed younger men, and I think younger men are evolving and have evolved in a lot of different aspects. I also interviewed men who live in urban India. Not all of them come from urban India. A lot of them have been raised in tier 2, tier 3 cities and have moved to urban India during early adulthood, but they have very urban influences. These men were also very internet savvy. So yet, so all these three things, aligned. Even so, I had a man tell me that, some cousin of hers who's in the marriage market was like earning more than a potential suitor, and her father was pressurizing her to quit the job, take up another job where she would earn less than the potential suitor, because he felt that the guy felt threatened, right? And when I asked him what his views are on it, he's like, I don't think it's a big deal. Anyway, shaadi ke baad to, she'll have kids and all, and she'll have to work less, right? And this is a very educated, well-traveled, very urban man we're talking about, who's young in his 20s, right? So there are men who still hold on to those beliefs, but there are also men who don't, who have broken away from it entirely. So I think it's all over the spectrum, really. And we are a very complex country, so I don't think it's fair to make generalized statements. But I think the only thing that I can say with certainty is that things are changing. And I think we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep kind of nudging the change forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Guys, I'd love to open it out to questions. If people have, you can raise your hand or write it in the chat box. Sukriti says, my namesake, that there should be an app where we can find sensitive men.
That's a great idea. Maybe I'll make that app. I'm like so lost after this book has come out. I don't know what to do with my life now. So that's a great idea.
So Sukriti says, please. Amita says, lots of love. Does anybody have any specific questions? Would love to take them. I do see a hand up. Go ahead. Tanmay, go ahead. Amita, go ahead. I'm asking Tanmay also to unmute. Go ahead, Amita.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Sukriti and Prachi. Wonderful topic. I would have a question for Prachi. I would like to know all about the book. Given all my exactly about this men, and will it be very good? Is it a book that it holds up to what you have written about? And is it because I'm planning to buy this book. I have not heard about this book, but I'm glad to have met you here. So I would just like to know whatever we have shared in chat, but how far does this go in terms of men? given our reasons, given our examples, given a lot of things which I've put in chat and from others also. So what do you think?
I'm not sure what you mean when you say how far does it go? Like in terms of behavior, in terms of like, what do you mean? I'm not sure I understand.
Overall, Prachi.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There was some background noise coming, so I can't figure out where it's coming from. Go ahead, Amita.
Yeah, in terms of all the aspects you've mentioned, so where does this lie? Is it a very good insight? I'm sure it must be wonderful because I'm just waiting to pick this book of yours, and but how just can this be put in every reason or whatever we have put out in the chats, depending on the questions you've asked and what you've heard from all of us. But how far does it go, like in terms of anything? Maybe a marriage, maybe a relation, maybe in general, this men swag thing.
So
I believe in equality. So I don't, because I know in our society all these things are, we have given our reasons, why they are, they think that it's always the man, nothing about the woman. Now, if about working, looking after the children, or you're just working, whatever, whichever way, it's always the question of money comes, like a particular, one of them had mentioned about the problem of a divorce on that.
And I think getting some background noise. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute you, but there is some background noise there. Go ahead, Prachi. I'll let you answer Amita's questions. There are also a lot of questions that have come in also in the chat.
Okay. So I'm still not clear on your question. Do you mean how far do I go with these things in the book, or like how far in the book? Okay.
In the book. How much are you covering of this?
How much am I exploring that? Yeah. Okay, sure. So I think most of the things that we talked about today are talked about in the book in a little bit more detail. There are a lot of other aspects that are talked about in the book, which we did not even touch upon today. The book is mostly about dating. I do talk about the courtship period, marriage, and just very briefly about fatherhood. But fatherhood is more touch and go. But I do talk about marriage and courtship. But a lot of it is about dating. I would say that there are a lot of aspects of masculinity in general that I have explored in the book, which we did not talk about today. So I hope that answers your question.
So Sangeeta is asking, what about midlife crisis and male toxicity? Did you get to speak on this?
Midlife crisis, I mean, I don't know if I believe in midlife crisis. I think we're always in a crisis all the time in our adulthood. So, so like I said, the oldest person I interviewed for the book is around 40. I would definitely not call that midlife. I think that's very young. So I don't think I go into that too much, what happens around midlife. It's more of a younger age group. Yeah.
Before I give it to Julian, your inputs on live-in relationships. What is the feeling of the younger generation on that? And then over to you, Julian.
So definitely live-in relationships are becoming more and more acceptable, which I think is great. I'm very pro live-in relationships. And also, for those of you who don't know, couples in live-in relationships have almost the same rights, legal rights, as couples who are married, including the right to adopt a child. And a child adopted by a cohabiting couple, also has the same rights as a child born to a married couple. So just putting it out there. But I think live-in relationships are definitely a good thing for society. And more of us should support it and should encourage people, young people, or like young adults to live with your partner before you marry them. So the sentiment among people that I interviewed, a lot of them are or were in live-in relationships before they got married. And it's not, I think there's a whole myth around the fact that live-in relationships are frivolous and, you're living together because you don't want to get married, you're avoiding marriage, you're avoiding commitment. But actually, it's the opposite. Most people seem to feel that they want to live together before they commit because they want to make the right choice and the right decision. So rather than an avoidance of marriage, live-in relationships are more an avoidance of divorce.
Julian, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, my question is very short. Do you think men are coachable?
I know that men are more open to coaching than they are to counseling. That is a statistic I came across recently. I don't think any adult should be coachable, if you know what I mean. I think it's not about coaching. It's about encouraging conversation, and it's about introspection. And I think someone who doesn't want to introspect will never introspect no matter what, right? So, and it doesn't have anything to do with gender. I think there are a lot of women also who are very stubborn.
Vanshika is asking, are gender roles only due to conditioning, or is it also based on genetics?
So there are some studies that show that there are certain biological differences, in the male brain and the female brain, and also hormones and hormonal fluctuations, etc. So there is that element for sure. But definitely socialization and societies play a larger role than biology does when it comes to gender. And we see it, right? We have societies that are more gender neutral. For example, I'll give you guys this example. In Sweden, the government gives 48 months of paid parental leave. It's not maternity leave, it's not paternity leave, it's parental leave. And each parent is mandated to take minimum of 6 months. And beyond those 6 months each, you can then split it over time. But, in a society like that, you'll find parents are much, or fathers are much more involved. One person I interviewed, he is a dad in the US, and he went for prenatal classes and training when his wife was carrying. Where in India do you see that happening? You don't see that happening, right? So as a result, he's much more involved as a father. He changes the baby's diapers, and he's just like much more involved than an average Indian man is, because we don't have these social structures that encourage fathers to be more involved. So I think there are biological differences, yes, for sure. But a lot of this genderization is very social.
Two more questions, and then we'll end for the day. Amit has asked a very interesting question. I want to know why Indian men assume women are only for sex and not comfortable conversations.
I think only Indian men can answer that. I think only Indian men can answer that. But I would actually disagree with this. I interviewed a lot of young men who, in fact, told me that they would not be interested in having sex with someone that they can't have a conversation with, and they can't feel intellectually and emotionally connected with. So I think, yes, there is a lot of objectification of women, but it's changing. It's changing. So I think it's unfair to say this as a generalized statement about Indian men.
Tanmay is asking, how many of us would have got married had we been in a live-in relationship with our current partners?
That's very interesting. I don't know. I guess I don't know. We'll have to ask the people who were in live-in relationships and then got married or didn't. I suppose.
But interesting. Thank you, Prachi. Any last thoughts before we end for today?
Yeah,
That's the champion for men.
Yeah, so I just want
to activist.
I'm not a men's right activist, no, or activist rather. But I want to end this conversation, and this was such a wonderful conversation, and thank you everybody for being such a wonderful bunch and sharing all your thoughts. I really appreciate it. But I do want to end this with a reminder that the purpose of this book is to encourage men and women to have conversations with each other and to try to understand each other. And if there's any one takeaway that you must take from this session today, is that, find people in the opposite gender and sex, whether that's friends, partners, your father, mother, brother, sister, whoever, and just like talk to them and just listen to their story. And that's it. Change is not going to happen overnight, but we need to start talking to each other.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for attending. And it's always great to see so many comments. And Prachi, thank you very, very much. Lots of luck. And we're waiting for the sequel.
Thank you, Sukriti. And buy my book, everyone. That's the last thing I'm going to say. Buy my book. Thank you so much, Sukriti. This was wonderful. And thank you, everyone who is here today.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye. Night.